Hey guys, it's time for some more Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host, Magnet, and as you can see on the screen, today we're going to be talking about defeating Mutalisks in PvZ, which is one of the things that I think I see the most Protoss players struggling with as far as a general game situation that I was fortunate enough to find replays for and explain how you would go about doing that. A couple of the things that I have highlighted here are running safer openers, some viable transitions, and micro scouting reactions and stuff to Mutalisks. These are all the main ways that you're going to be doing better against Mutalisks rather than just running a random build and dying because you don't have the right units to deal with that, and we'll talk about those at length during the video. So let's just go ahead and get started. The first game we're going to watch here is between Oz and Nest, or if you're Korean you would say Oj, since Z sounds like J in Korean. And he is fighting Nest, who, if anybody knows Nest, he is really renowned for his Mutalisk usage in every matchup, so it's a really good player that knows all the ins and outs of Muta builds, and we're going to see somebody that figures out a way to beat that. So one thing I should mention is that we're not going to focus too much on the openers all that much, but I will say generally that Forge expands are going to attract more Mutalisk play than not, because Forge expands tend to have a little slower tech, in the sense that I guess they're a little more stubborn in their tech. Their transitions are a little slower. So in this case, Oz is actually going to run a really bad opener. That's typically really bad against Mutalisk, but he makes it work by using a little timing to exploit the fact that they won't have enough Mutalisks on the field to deal with what you're going to have out at a certain time. So I'll explain it as we walk through here. So Forge opener. Zerg's just going basically double expand here right after pull, which is really normal. I mean, there's nothing really to comment on too much. From the Protoss perspective, you're just going to want to run openers that are generally safe against Mutalisks. And like I said, for the most part, this opener from Oz is really not. And we'll see why in just a second. So, Nest getting everything up here. There's not a whole lot to say until we get to that point. But I will say one of the better ways to deal with Mutalisks is just to open up with Phoenix opener. And a lot of the really common builds in PvZ are just Phoenix into Colossus, super standard, and that'll discourage a lot of players from opening Mutalisks. So that is definitely an option. But Oz is going to do the exact opposite and open Robo. Typically Robo timings are better suited for things against like Roaches, sometimes Hydras, but lesser so. But especially they're not good to macro off of with Mutalisks. So we can see Oz definitely playing that transition as the game goes on. So he's going to open up with a Warp Prism. And this is not terribly common. He's just going to open up with a little bit of a Sentry drop, considering his only units on the map are Sentries and this Warp Prism in the near future. So there we go, kind of phasing them into the Warp Prism there. And after this is going to be Immortal. And most of the time if you run a build like this and just say, well, I'm just going to expand off of this and I'm going to use my Immortals because they're really good against Roaches, and then you get hit by Mutalisks, you're like, well, damn, that sucks. How am I supposed to beat Mutalisks? But the answer here is that you need to know that there are little sensitive timings if they go straight for Mutalisks. And that's going to be what we're going to see here from Oz. He's going to say there's going to be a point where you can't stop my army because I have too much stuff if you're going for Mutalisks that early. And you need to be aware of stuff like that. So Oz is going to come in here and drop, and ST is going to say, lol, no, that's never going to work. I have way too much stuff here on the ramp. So Oz is just going to kind of poke around a little bit, see what's going on. More importantly, he drops the sentry out to hallucinate something. And the hallucination scouting is going to be your biggest key to figure out what's going on with your opponent. So if you look at Nest's base, he's going to see soon that he has a lair, and there's 4 gases mining right now. He may see the 5th and 6th gases being taken, and that has to be pretty alarming, because if they're mining this much gas, they have to be spending it on something, especially if their lair is done. So he's going to scout around. And his Phoenix is going to come in here. He's going to see nothing yet. Nothing yet. He's going to look around still. He's going to start heading towards the 3rd, and he's going to be like, wait, what? There's nothing on the map right now, and you are showing lair and a lot of gas. So you need to be able to put this together and say, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Why am I not seeing anything quite yet? And this is because Nest is actually proxying a Spire, which is really cute. And I have died a lot to stuff like this because I'm not as diligent as Oz is with his scouting. So he'll get fortunate enough with this Warp Prism to eventually scout out the fact that there's a Spire on the map as he starts to fly down here. This has to be a huge red flag because Oz already has a bunch of Immortals out. This is going to be 3 Immortals, and they are worthless against Mutalisks. So he has to know that The only chance I really have of beating this type of build, this fast of a hidden Mutalisk switch, is if I get in his face and get enough stalkers and stuff on the map to know that's what's going on and be able to punish him for that. So this is the one way to deal with Mutalisk builds, is just to have options in your builds that just says, okay, if you're going Mutalisk, I'm just going to attack you right away because you won't have enough to deal with it, and kill you that way. So that's what we're going to see here from Oz, and yeah, we're going to watch this develop here. Now, he does need to eventually start warping in Stalkers, but there's so many Zerglings here, he can't really afford to start doing that, but he'll eventually get there. See the Immortals, Sentries, and Zealots targeting down this base really fast. You can see somebody like Stardust like to do this a lot. If you can ever kill their Spire, you can assure that they won't have the tech that they want. So this is one big win for Oz. And then as he continues to come up here, a lot of Muta players will put up a lot of spines to try and prevent from a counterattack, which is what we're seeing right now. And if you start to warp in Stalkers and you can eventually get enough to push down those Mutalisks, then that's basically game over. The only other really annoying thing from the Mutalisks that might happen is they may decide, you know what, I don't have enough to stop this right now, so I'm just going to try and base trade and send all my Mutalisks over here and try and kill you. So if you're in this type of situation, which can happen every once in a while, your option here needs to be continuing to warp in Stalkers here on the front line, but as soon as you see them starting to leave and base trade, you should use your advantage with your forge and the amount of minerals you should have sitting around, and to drop a ton of cannons. Like 6 or 7 cannons is not unusual. Or, if you're too late on reacting to that, you can just warp in some Stalkers back here, maybe use a Mothership Core to overcharge a Nexus. Just keep one base safe that has your tech around it, namely the Cybernetics Core, so that you can continue pushing up here and continue forcing the base trade and eventually win, because you will have enough stuff to win that. So, yeah, you can see Oz just plowing all this stuff down right now, and because he's able to warp in back at home, this is not enough Mutalisks to actually get on top of this base and start defeating it. Stalkers will be able to push this away fairly easily. And from this point on, the game goes on for a lot longer. Nesty is really stubborn about leaving this game, but Oz most assuredly does win it because he decides to exploit this timing in a straight-to-Mutalisk build. This would obviously be a lot different if they went for something like Roach first or Hydra first, but that was also another option he could play, is that the Immortals are good against Roaches. Maybe he could expand off of something like Roaches, and then he could play the options out differently if he scouted Mutalisks a little bit later. So this is definitely one way to deal with this, and that is just to kill them at a timing that they're not comfortable with, if that's an option in your build. So if you're able to stay on top of that and you know those reactions, then that's one way to do it. Let me grab a second replay here. This one's going to be San versus Mini Razor, and this one's going to be different in the sense that, excuse me, the Zerg doesn't go straight for Mutalisks, and the Protoss doesn't just try and kill them right away for it. So we're going to see it develop into a little bit later of a game so that you guys can see a little different options in that regard. So San, of course, is the red Protoss up here, and perhaps I guess another interesting little difference here is that San's going to open up Gateway Expand. He's going to open up with a Gateway first rather than a Forge first. And they're not nearly as susceptible to straight-to-Mutalisk builds, because attacking off a Gateway Expand before your third base is really common, and that's one of the most sensitive things to builds, such as skip Roach, skip any other tech, and go straight to Mutalisk. So we will watch this develop. So gas coming down here, nothing too interesting for the first little while. I'm just going to ×8 this until it's an important point. Mini Razor going for a triple hatch before pool build, so that's pretty... that's okay, especially against Gateway Expands if you can hold down any counterattacks. You will see that every once in a while if you do go Gateway Expand, or even if you go Forge Expand. It's a pretty good opener from Zerg. This time, San's going to open up with a Gateway Pressure, so he isn't showing any tech right away. So what this is going to do, this is going to do a few things. Number one, if Zerg doesn't have Zergling speed, and if he doesn't have Roaches on the field against a lot of these Gateway openers, they can lose way more than they should. So this is kind of indirectly forcing him to go into Roaches, which is going to make expanding a lot easier for San later on, with very minimal tech. So we'll see this develop. San's just going to hang out over here, start to warp in with only Zealots at this point. He's not spending any of his gas quite yet, considering he's just going to save that for the defense later on. And if he ever gets in trouble here, he can always just recall, but we're seeing the Roach Warren come down now. He's forcing that out. Zergling speed is done. So he's going to try and force as many Roaches as he can and deal whatever damage he can. Notice there's not a lot of drones to be lost here for Mini Razor, and there's no much core energy, so all these Zealots are dead. So Mini Razor are doing pretty well against this, but it did force out some Roaches, which means that Roach Zergling is something you can really reliably expand against pretty much all the time. So because he's forced out these roaches, Son's just going to say, alright, I'm just going to put down a robo and I'll take a third base here very soon. So we're going to see that here in just a second. I promise it's what's going to happen, not just making stuff up. Forge on the way just to get some upgrades. Keeping up on upgrades is also really good against pretty much any Zerg thing that they're going to try and do. Immortal's on the way now to react to the roaches. And this is where the smarts start to come in for Mini Razor. And the way that he's doing this is really smart. He's going to see that there is a robo down. There should be Immortals coming out. So I'm going to show like I have a lot of roaches. I'm going to show like that's my long-term plan. But I'm eventually going to switch into Mutalisks. And that's how a lot of Protoss players get trapped. They get trapped making a lot of Immortals and they don't scout. And then all of a sudden there's Mutalisk on the field and they're in a lot of trouble because they only have Immortals and Sentries. And they're trying to defend 3 bases with it, which is like impossible. One of the ways to soften any transition between any sort of hardcore ground and air tech is a Twilight Council, because you can research Blink, and Blink has a lot of versatility with holding off Mutalisks, with threatening with a big counterattack and stuff like that. So this is definitely one of the most safe plays in this matchup, is after your third base is down, drop a Twilight Council, get your Blink, and then you can react to them a lot more reliably and safely, considering you won't be as limited on your tech. So that's one good way just to prepare against pretty much anything that's possible. You usually won't flat out win with the Blink tech against Mutalisks, but it will give you a softer transition into something like Phoenix, which is what we're going to see in this game. That's basically the only long-term counter to Mutalisks. So the Blink is on the way, and Mini Razor again is showing these roaches and Zerglings as if he's going to stay on this for the rest of the game. So it's up to Son right now not to take too much damage from this, but Warpins and whatnot should be able to hold it, especially with the Immortals that he has on the map, and Force Fields that he's able to utilize right now. You can see that Immortal totally getting pushed around, but should be totally fine. Now he's able to pick this apart, Mini Razor making the mistake of not attacking his entire army at once. But now the Spire is up, so Son needs to know what's going on here, and that this isn't a full-on commitment to roaches. So this is why having these sentries out and being able to continually scout with them over and over is a big deal. So now Son has held off that attack. Now he has to be a little bit suspicious and be thinking, okay, well, you lost a bunch of roaches there. Are you going to stay on Roach and go into Hydra? Are you going to do something like Swarm Host? Or should I totally switch up my composition here and get into something prepping for mutas? So you should see a Hallucination Scout come out here any second from Son. And I promise it should happen. He does find out about this in some way or another, so just see when that happens. Son, where's your hallucination? Well, either way, I promise that it does come down eventually. So we'll see that come up. But even if he doesn't see that right away, you can see that the Blink is on the way, so he'll be able to hold off from that for a little bit. And he saw it. He saw a hallucination here somewhere. I don't know how I missed that, but he did send it out eventually, and he did see the Spire, so he knows what's going on. Like I was talking about, the only longer-term solution to mutas is Phoenix. So that's what he's eventually going to get into. But in the meantime, because he wasn't totally prepared for the Mutalisks that are on the map right now, the Blink is a good tool to kind of buffer the transition between the Phoenix and the Robotech. So there's some Blink Stalkers on the map here. He needs to try and take as little worker damage as possible. He's researching +1 attack. He should put a Fleet Beacon down here in just a second now that the Stargates are done, so he can get Phoenix range and continually hold this off. But you can see the Blink is keeping him okay for now. And what Mini Razor should be doing behind this is taking a lot of bases, since it's what you're supposed to do with this type of play. You can see Son being annoying and blocking that for the time being, but that's what Mini Razor wants to do, is he wants to get his Mutalisks out and he wants to take a lot of bases so he can fund his continual Mutal production. So Son producing these Phoenix right now off of just a couple Stargates. If you really want to be safe against it, I would go up to 3, and I would get Phoenix range as well, but he doesn't want to get tricked into something big like a Hydralisk switch, which you also really need to be mindful of. So Son's playing this very middle of the road, very nonchalant, but he needs to kind of make a decision here sooner or later. And there's the Fleet Beacon now, so he can grab his Phoenix range and eventually start to push these away. So we're going to be getting a little bit more into the micro of this situation, which we talk about a little bit in the replay videos, or rather the composition videos, the replay videos, lol. The composition videos, and that is that Phoenix with range can just barely outrange Mutalisks, enough to the point where you can chase them down as much as you want, and as soon as they turn around to chase you, you can pull back. So we're going to see a lot of that throughout the game. And that's the whole idea with Phoenix, is that you don't want to just attack in there and fight the Mutalisks. You want to keep the Phoenix just barely out of range of the Mutalisk attacks while you can still deal damage to them. So we're going to see that throughout the game. So just kind of posturing up here as Mini Razor, kind of trying to find a good angle on this army right now. You can see the Blink is still really helping out. The Guardian Shield is really good against Mutalisk because it nullifies a lot of the bounce damage off the Mutalisk glaives. Every single incoming attack is reduced by 2, and every single bounce, which can be up to 3 on Mutalisks, will be reduced by 2, which gives you a grand total of about 6. So having these sentries is useful in a number of ways. You can see now the Phoenix is starting to poke out a little bit, started to deal damage to the Mutalisk, but as soon as the Mutalisk start to recover, you want to pull it back a little bit. So the micro is starting to come into play here. One thing that can start to get annoying though is once you start to get this, you don't, I mean the Zerg probably won't let you stay in this situation forever because it's not a micro battle that they can ever win unless they get some kind of support. So that support is either going to be something like Hydralisks, something like Infestors, or in this case it's going to be Corruptors. The Corruptors are going to be there to kind of bully the Phoenix around so that the Mutas can be protected from the Corruptors trying to outrange them. So that's going to be what's going to be going on here. And you'll eventually need a solution for the Corruptors, but funnily enough, one of the big solutions is that if you just get enough Phoenix, you can actually kill the Corruptors, and if you ever do kill the Corruptors, the Mutalisks are totally exposed against a huge Phoenix count, then that's pretty much game over. So that's another little solution here. You will want to also consider other ways to deal with the Corruptors, such as things like Archons or even more Blink Stalkers. So just keep an eye on that. He is losing quite a bit of Phoenix here, being just a little bit sloppy. We should see the Phoenix range upgrade come up here any second now the Fleet Beacon is done, and there we go. And I really wouldn't mind seeing a 3rd Stargate at this rate, because we can see that Mini Razor wants to be aggressive and he wants to trade with these Mutalisks right now. That's just not really ever a bad idea, is to get into that 3rd Stargate and just get enough Phoenix to be able to push this away. And look how greedy Mini Razor's being now with these Mutalisks, and this is why you need to find a solution for these sooner rather than later, otherwise they're going to have the whole map, they're going to have as much gas as they want. You're going to have a hard time breaking that. So this is a pretty long game, and I want to show you guys that even though San isn't on the map, he isn't denying all these bases, that it is still possible to win this, and that's simply with the composition advantage. So Mutalisk and stuff starting to break down rocks and give them extra attack avenues. San's going to be a little aggressive now and say, you know what, my Phoenix range is done. You can see the Phoenix range on there is now 7, which is really long. And if you've been slacking, or if you're trying to switch compositions right now, then this is a really strong timing. So San's going to start getting on the map just a little bit, kind of not let Mini Razor have everything he wants. He knows that a counterattack is possible, so you need to be willing to move your Phoenix away to only where the Mutalisks are, while the rest of your army is doing something else. So rocks go down there as soon as I click on them. And Mutalisk, or rather the Phoenix, still trying to be as annoying as possible and trying to get as many Mutas as they can without losing too much. You can see just because San is sharking around the map, he is vulnerable to counterattacks a little bit, so throwing up extra cannons is never a bad idea. It's actually a ton of cannons. So this is another little thing that you can get into. Once you're in this phase of the game where it's basically time to take a 4th base, you can do one of two things. Either you can throw up a whole bunch of stuff back at one base to prevent a counterattack from Mutalisks and losing too much, and you can just go for it, or you can continue to try to macro and take another base, but you need to be really mindful of the different transitions. The transitions that you want to look out for are things like Infestors, Hydralisks, or Ultralisks, and they all require totally different responses. That's one of the biggest ways that people die to Mutalisk builds, is because their later game transitions are pretty nasty to deal with. So if you don't opt to just go straight for the attack and try to kill him right away before he has an opportunity to switch, then you need to realize that you need to have flexibility to deal with all those situations. So throw down extra robos just in case it's Infestor or Swarm Host or something like that, or Ultralisk. You can make Immortals off of here. Or if they stay on things like Hydralisk, you can make Colossus. And the extra Stargates as well are always a really good response. You want to have a lot of infrastructure at this stage of the game just to be ready to respond to their different tech switches. And more importantly, if you have the APM, you want to be as aggressive as possible with your Phoenix and see what you can get. See if you can scout out those transitions as well. And find little windows like this where you can start to be aggressive that he can't really respond all that well because your composition is just too good. So the Phoenix are wondering, okay, my army's here, he's going to kill this base. What's going on with the Mutalisks? Where are they going? And if you can ever catch them separated like this, where the Corruptors are not in the same spot as the Mutalisks, and get a bunch of free Mutalisk kills, then that's great. But you definitely don't ever want to engage the Corruptors here. So you can see San start to pull away as soon as the Corruptors respond. And sometimes you can pick off stray little packs of Corruptors like this if you stay on top of your Phoenix control. So that's always another option. But Mini Razor's starting to get a little more aggressive here. Should drop a force field, which is really good there from San. and the Mutalisks start to come back. So it starts to become a really back and forth game, and if the Mutalisks are ever exposed like this, and you can get a lot of free kills, and that's going to be really good for you. You can see the Mutalisks just start to get completely torn up by the Phoenix if they start to get into those one-on-one battle situations. So a really big fight going on here. There's a lot of Stalkers. Guardian Shields especially are extremely important. It's one of the biggest reasons why he's actually winning this battle right now. And you can see that eventually there is a lot of things you're going to want to look out for, but if they make a mistake like this and start to try and fight your army, then you need to be ready to punish them right away. More Mutalisks on the way, and of course if you continue your Phoenix production, you should be totally fine against that. And you'll notice the Phoenix are basically just always following where the Mutalisks are, while the rest of the army is either free to support the Phoenix if they need to, or they're free to just walk around and do whatever they want, considering there's not a lot else on the field to deal with them other than Zerglings at this point. So San really playing this out quite well. I think Mini Razor may be making some mistakes with being a little bit too aggressive. This is one of the reasons why having a ton of cannons here is a really good idea. Is just because it buffers so much against that. And again, you need to know where the Phoenix, or rather, you need to know where the Mutalisks are and be ready to report back there with your Phoenix. So he should send these home. But there's enough here to be able to kill whatever comes out of these hatcheries from here on out. So San's in a really spectacular position right now. And you can't take too much damage from these Corruptors, so just try to whittle them down the best you possibly can. And try to get on top of those Mutalisks if you ever can. And right now, Mini Razor's in a bad spot. We're seeing yet another base trade, which sometimes you need to be willing to do against the Mutalisk builds. We're seeing yet another base trade where no matter where Mini Razor goes, he's going to get bad trades because there's enough Stalkers out on the map, as well as the Phoenix support that should be closely following to deal with any big number of mutas. Excuse me. So we're going to see Mini Razor getting fairly desperate here to try and get this solved, but he reunites his armies. All of a sudden, a couple of Guardian Shields, the Phoenixes are rallying from behind, and you want to always put your Phoenix on the side of where the Mutalisks are so you can deal as much damage as possible. Because if you ever get something like Stalkers against Corruptors, then you know the game's over. And just because of continued good decisions with his Phoenix, and continued sharking army movement, and not letting Mini Razor get too comfortable with his composition, you can see San's way ahead. He's already knocked out a base here. This base has been fairly weakened, but at the same time, he's lost this base. A base right here has been killed, so San is really all over Mini Razor right now and has a pretty decent advantage, doing pretty well right now. From this point, it's really just up to San to decide to make enough stuff and go kill him. And San's clear plan throughout this game was never to take a fourth base. I guess he was too worried about being too vulnerable to this, but if you ever get momentum against a Mutalisk build like this, to where you're killing a lot of Mutalisks with your Phoenix, then there's no reason to relent and let them switch into something else that's going to counter your high Phoenix count. So we should eventually see San make enough stuff and just go kill Mini Razor. Or Mini Razor's just going to make the mistake again of being a little bit too aggressive with this and get bad trades and eventually die. I think Mini Razor's realizing he doesn't have a lot of options right now because he's reduced to 2 bases worth of mining against a 2-base Protoss that has way better tech. So San, again, continuing to attack across the map here, and Mini Razor assembling his forces, but there's so few mutas on the map right now, these Phoenix can almost just kill them easily by themselves. And again, there's nothing, like, all these Corruptors are taking damage from the Stalkers, and by the time the Mutalisks engage, the Phoenix just have to sit there and be ready for it. So Phoenix are ready, dealing a lot of damage to the mutas, and as they try and use the Corruptors as a buffer, just move the Phoenix around and get on top of the Mutalisks. And yeah, there we go. GG and well played. And I agree, that was well played by San. So I hope that gave you guys at least some decent ideas as far as how to deal with Mutalisks in this matchup. Later on, I will run videos where we look at more really deep late game PvZ, where switches into Mutalisks and stuff like that can happen. But at that point, it's like we're talking more about every single tech option being opened rather than just Mutalisks themselves. So if you see builds like this, at least you should know what to do against them in the future. And that is plan openers that are safe against a lot of different things and have options to punish muta plays, or be willing to get into Phoenix and just understand how to control and manipulate those Phoenix against the Mutalisks to win longer term battles. So hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll be back with more videos very soon, so look out for that, and take care in the meantime.